thanks first to Lee and Olav for inviting us to present our work here. I'm going to comment on three questions concerning the geography of crowdfunding. So the first one is just what seems reasonably straightforward, which is, does crowdfunding relax the geographic constraints on access to early stage capital? So just in reaction to the I think, well-established fact that most early stage funding is remarkably localized. To what extent does crowdfunding relax that? And then secondly, if it does, then does crowdfunding make the early stage financing world flat? And the preview answers here are that to question one is yes, it does seem to relax the constraints. That seems probably somewhat obvious. If so, does it make the early stage financing world flat? There's a much more nuanced answer to that question, and it has to do with some topics that have already been discussed today concerning the dynamics of funding activity on crowdfunding platforms. And then the one that Christian, Catalina, my co-author, and Avi Goldfarb and I are most interested in is to what extent, to the extent that crowdfunding changes the geography of early stage capital flows, how does that impact innovation? So in other words, the reason that we are sort of so focused on the geography question is because we think it's actually relevant to the broader innovation question. Okay. So the setting for what we're doing is all information. In other words, we are examining geographic patterns because and what's the underlying source of variation in geographic behavior we suspect has got a lot to do with information. So of course we can think of there being two types of information, codified and tacit. And why that distinction is important here is because codified information is dramatically affected by digitization in a way that tacit knowledge isn't. And that the allocation of early stage capital relies on both types of information. So you can think of codified information in this setting as reading business plans and product specs and learning about the history of the founders. Whereas tacit information are things like the personality of the founders, the dynamics of the team, how well are they functioning together, just their smarts, how do they respond to unanticipated questions, the types of things that angels and VCs traditionally look for. And of course, the cost of acquiring tacit information increases with distance because they basically require going to meet face-to-face with the founders as opposed to codified information, which can be transmitted over the internet. And so where our key finding is going to rest is on the point that different types of information have different levels of salience during different parts of the fundraising cycle. And so, in other words, a simple way to think about this is that to the extent that the tacit to codified ratio is declining over the period of raising funding in terms of the importance of that, that may affect the geography of the funding process. Okay, so I'm going to just give you a few examples to highlight the key. Lee's asked us to highlight just the sort of the key points of the paper. So the first, we'll draw from three data sources. The data in the paper is primarily drawn from Celeban. So of course everyone here knows the other two. A few might not know the first one. Celeban was is a crowdfunding platform for raising money for early stage artists, musicians. And it was interesting because when we first started studying crowdfunding, which was in 2007, they were the largest crowdfunding site in the world. And so, they were really relevant. Of course, they've been far eclipsed by sites like Kickstarter. But what was interesting about Celeban was that they enabled something that had some flavors of equity crowdfunding, which was revenue sharing. So in other words, people who funded these projects, which was essentially to finance the recording of an album, were given rights for revenue sharing. Okay. So the first question, does crowdfunding relax the geographic constraints on access to early stage capital? I'm just going to offer two statistics here just to give a sense, which is, so this comes from the Celeban data, that 13%, so this is the numbers I've circled there, 13%, so think how, these are early stage projects, they're unsigned artists, so this is, what the image you can have in your mind for these, or this is a person in their basement who writes and records some music and then posts 3 demo songs on their platform, on the platform. That 13% of the funding, so during this period of the company's history, they had to raise, their provision point was set consistent for everybody. They all had to raise $50,000 to get anything, no more, no less. And so 13% came from local funders and 77% came from distant funders. So in other words, this was the first striking fact to us, in 2008 or whenever it was first saw the statistic, was, wow, isn't it remarkable that so many people are who are don't even really know if this artist in a sense exists, are willing to fund an album that they've said they'd like to make. Okay, moving to AngelList. Which is of course very different. AngelList is focusing. This is a much smaller sample. So this is current as of about a week ago. 127 startups. So this is startups who raise capital through AngelList online. 127 startups, of which about 68% are based in the Silicon Valley, and 1,300 investors. So just looking down the first column there, the Silicon Valley startups. So of those 68% of startups, that 58% of them, so think of this, basically 60% of their investors are from the Silicon Valley, but 40% are not. So, to us, this was, again, reasonably interesting. At such an early stage of finance, so the median amount that they're raising is about $250K, 40% of their investors are coming from outside the Silicon Valley, for Silicon Valley startups. For the non-Silicon Valley startups, maybe even more interesting, half of their capital is coming from the Silicon Valley. So where are these non-Silicon Valley ventures? Here are their locations. Okay, so in other words, they are in all sorts of places, and they are getting early stage capital from people who are physically quite remote. So I think in answer to our just the first point we wanted to make is that crowdfunding seems to significantly relax the geographic constraint on this early stage capital allocation. Okay. The second point is, so if it does it just flatten this world? In other words, is geography irrelevant? And so here, and this is in essence the main part of the paper that was posted for the conference, is that we focus on the Celeban data and we're looking over the 3-year period, 2006 to 2009. During which time, like I say, it was you could think of it as quasi equity funding, in the sense that those who financed these albums were given revenue share, and we focus in this study on just those artists that successfully raised the $50,000, and a key piece of information we focus on is the cumulative investment. So that is probably the single most common feature across all crowdfunding platforms, is that they show the barometer of how much you've raised to date. And our estimation strategy is that we focus on, so the unit of analysis is the artist investor week. Okay, so we're focusing on the artist investor week, and we're estimating the probability that a given investor will invest in a given artist in a particular week, conditional on the fact that they make at least one investment in that artist over the fundraising period. And what we're interested in is to what extent does the propensity to invest change over, I'm just going to show the graphical result, change over time. So relative to the baseline period, which is the period during which the artist is raising their 0 to 10, is in the 0 to 10K range, that the probability of somebody investing is, increases over these incremental periods. 4% higher in the chance of making an investment in any given week when the artist is in the 30 to 40 range relative to when they're in the 0 to 10 range. Okay, so then we do the same thing, but we split the data by local and distant. Because remember, we're focused here on geography. So we're interested in to what extent do local investors behave differently than distant investors, given this focus on traditionally very localized early stage funding. And so again, I'll show you just the graphical result. So relative to the 0 to 10K range, that distant investors seem to be far more responsive to the amount raised to date than local investors. So in other words, how we've interpreted it is there's some kind of information in the cumulative capital raised to date that is influencing the propensity of distant investors to invest, but not local investors. So then what we did is we went and coded these so-called friends and family. So what we were interested in is to what extent is our friends and family playing a role here. And we coded friends and family in two ways. First of all, we actually just asked the artist. So we sent the artist, we said, here's your list of 400 people who've invested in your album. Can you just check off the ones who are friends and family, that you have some kind of social relationship with? And then the second approach we did was algorithmically, where we looked at the behavior of investors online, and we just predicted, assigned some probability that they were friends and family. And so we looked at things like, friends and family, because they have a social relationship outside the platform, do most of their communication off the platform. So you can see here that friends and family have a much smaller propensity to send emails to entrepreneurs through the system. So we have every email sent, not the content, but just the timestamp of an email being sent from one to the other, and comments. And so many fewer emails, many fewer comments sent, and many fewer received. And so just get to the punchline of this result, which is that once we control for so we interact friends and family with the capital range, and once we do that, the distance effect goes away. So in other words, even though friends and family, some are local and some are distant, they are disproportionately local. That it was friends and family that was driving the local result, and so in other words, friends and family don't respond to the cumulative capital information the way that non-friends and family do. Okay, what do friends and family know? So in other words, there's something, might it be that they know certain things more than distant investor or non-friends and family, but not others. And so what we do next is we distinguish between the first time they put money into the fundraising campaign versus subsequent times. So once we take out the first investment and we only look at the timing of second and subsequent investments, there's no difference between friends and family and non-friends and family. So in other words, the difference in timing is driven by the first investment, the timing of the first investment. Okay, and so what we took from that was that friends and family have, the information friends and family have is associated with search, and the decision of whether to initially, make some commitment to that, one out of 10,000 artists. But all the other information that's coming, so all the information that they subsequently post on the platform, as well as the cumulative investment, is not having, isn't influencing their behavior any more than it does the non-friends and family. AngelList has, in some sense, built this right into their business model, which is to say, unlike other crowdfunding type of platforms where ventures can just come on, from basically, put up their platform and start raising capital. At AngelList, you have to show up with an offline relationship. So in other words, you have to arrive with somebody who's committing to put $100K in a specified term sheet in order to set up your profile on their platform. And so they've built this offline information source, which seems to be particularly important at the beginning of the process, right into their business model. And then they've amped it up in the last, whatever it was, September 23rd, when they announced syndicates and backers, which essentially gives those early people a financial incentive for doing that. So before they had no financial incentive, now they've got a 10% carry on the others that come in after them. Okay, so the last point here, just the last point I'll just make is in terms of the extent to which this, the geography affects innovation. I'll just point to a couple of, or just one result, which is we compared, there was the remarks made about Kickstarter raising, distributing as much money to the arts as the NEA. And what we were interested in is the extent to which that allocation of capital was more concentrated than the allocation of some baseline, in this case the NEA. And so what we found here was that the crowd seems to allocate capital in a reasonably similar fashion. In other words, it doesn't seem to be more agglomerated, that it's all going to just a small handful of places. And it's not that dissimilar in technology either. So this is Kickstarter funding relative to venture capital by state, also reasonably similar. And so I'll just end off with this map here, which is while the crowd seems to allocate capital in a reasonably similar fashion geographically as other, whether it's VC or NEA, there are exceptions. So, for example, it's not surprising that California and New York are the top states in a variety of fields. That Nashville, Tennessee is top in music. But Minnesota being a top in tech, Massachusetts in fashion, North Carolina in food, those ones are less obvious. And so what we're interested in and where we're going next is trying to find explain the exceptions. What's driving the what seem to be surprising geographic allocation of capital results on platforms like that. That's it. Thank you.